Hi, everyone. I'm Alex Patterson. I'm the Senior Director of Parliamentary Affairs with Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East. I'm both a host and one of the presenters tonight for the webinar. The purpose of tonight's meeting, as you can see, is meeting with your MP on Canada's arms trade with Israel. We're going to go over both some facts about the arms trade, a little bit about the policy context. A lot of what we're going to cover today is covered in the position paper that we sent out before the holidays. But we're going to cover some background as well, and then some techniques for meeting with your MP. In terms of the way that we're going to run the webinar, we're going to have everyone use the Q&A box to ask questions, and you should be able to upvote questions that you like. So we'll know which ones resonate the most with participants. Questions will be addressed at the end of the presentations. The speakers tonight will be myself and our Vice President, Michael Buchert, who will be covering some of the facts about the arms trade. I'm going to start off tonight with a land acknowledgement. So CJPME acknowledges that our head office is located in Montreal and that it's on unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Gaza, otherwise colonially known as the Mohawk, whose presence in Montreal and the surrounding area reaches back to time immemorial. CJPME recognizes the Gaza as the customary keepers and defenders of the St. Lawrence River watershed and its tributaries. We honor their long history of welcoming many nations to this beautiful territory and uphold and uplift the voices and values of our host nation. Further, CJPME respects and affirms the inherent treaty rights of all Indigenous peoples across this land. CJPME has and will continue to honor the commitments to self-determination and sovereignty we have made to Indigenous nations and peoples. CJPME also acknowledges the historical oppression of lands, cultures, and the original peoples in what we now know as Canada, and fervently believe that this work should contribute to the healing and decolonizing journey we all share. And we really believe that this is consistent with our core values around respect for international law when we approach the issue of Palestinian human rights. So with that kind of intro and housekeeping in order, I'm going to toss it over to Michael, and I will answer the questions that we're already getting in the chat while Michael presents.
Thank you, Alex. Let me just get my there. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we're able to see it.
Okay, so thanks, Alex. And I'll just say a little bit about myself. My name is Michael Buchert. I'm the Vice President of CJPME in Montreal. And I am also the Director of Policy. And for the last few years, we've really been diving into this issue of Canada's arms trade with Israel. And so I'm excited to give a bit of an overview of what we've been finding. My background is that I did a PhD in political economy and sociology at Carleton University in Ottawa, looking at the debates over boycotts in Canada, specifically comparing the current boycott of Israel to the debates over the boycott of South Africa during the anti-apartheid movement. And very interested in how we can learn from the legacy of the anti-apartheid movement and apply the same strategies to our struggle for freedom in Palestine. So I do want to talk a little bit about to give a wide view of the arms trade. We have been pushing for an arms embargo for quite some time. there's been quite a bit of momentum over the last few years in support of an arms embargo in Canada, with different civil society groups, churches, unions, even political parties like the Green Party and the NDP coming to a position where they're calling on Canada to stop exporting weapons to Israel based on human rights concerns. And I think we need to build on that momentum. We really do see the arms trade as a significant area that we can use to leverage as a way to try to compel a ceasefire in Gaza, to try to end Canadian complicity in human rights violations. And it's something that I think is worth talking to all of our members of parliament about, and see if we can continue to build the demand for this as an urgent measure. So this part of the presentation will provide a high-level understanding of the arms trade with Israel, including how Canada is arming Israel, how this has changed over time, what types of weapons are being exported, and if there's time, some of the other military ties between Canada and Israel. And as mentioned,
Michael, your presenter view is showing, so the slides are really small. If there's any way you might be able to adjust that, that'd help everyone.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Sorry. Well, okay.
That looks better on my end.
All right. So that's what we're going to talk about here. And so first of all, how is Canada arming Israel? Unlike the United States, Canada does not actually directly give or sell weapons to the Israeli government. You may be familiar with the context of the United States, where the US government actually provides billions of dollars worth of military aid directly to Israel. That does not happen in the Canadian context. Instead, Canada plays more of a mediator role, approving export permits for military goods that are then transferred to Israel. So a mediator role where Canadian companies producing weapons comes to Canada for a permit. Canada approves or denies that permit, and then those are then sent to an Israeli buyer. And over 20 million worth of weapons have been exported to Israel that way in 2022, which is the last year that we have in terms of numbers. Now, when we're thinking about Canada's role in the arms trade, it's important to remember that Canada has legal obligations under international law and domestic law to make sure that it does not approve the export of weapons if there's a risk that they could be implicated in war crimes. Whether Canada abides by those obligations is another question, and Alex will talk a little bit about that later. But ideally, or not just ideally, but lawfully, Canada cannot just play a role of a rubber stamp allowing these weapons to go without any concern for human rights. So let's take a step back and look at the historical trends in terms of Canada's exports to Israel. Here you can see going back to 1978, the earliest years on record, all the way to the 2020s. You can actually see that the values in terms of military exports has fluctuated pretty significantly, with a historical high point in 1987. But I want to zoom in on two specific moments that I think tell interesting stories. So first, if we go to the more recent years, from 2010 to 2022, you can see that the trend is of an increasing escalation or acceleration in the increase in arms exports to Israel year after year. What this tells us is that the trend is going in exactly the wrong direction. This is the trend that we are trying to reverse. But if we go back to this other moment, I think we can see something interesting too. If we look at the years between 1980 and the year 2000, what we see is that there's a bit of growth in exports leading to a high point in 87, but then there's a steep drop and almost a decade in which there's very little, if any, exports going to Israel. What happens here is that in 1987 is the start of the first Palestinian Intifada, or struggle against the occupation. And you have Palestinians demonstrating and Israeli forces using violent force against those demonstrators. And actually, This leads to the Canadian government to be very critical of Israel's actions, and they actually impose a policy of what they called an embargo, where they stopped military trade, both the exports to Israel, and they stopped allowing the purchasing of Israeli military goods. And this policy was in place until the mid-90s. Here you can see the mid-90s, a very gradual, nominal sort of increase, a resumption of arms exports. This happened not because the human rights risk all of a sudden disappeared, but because there was a political decision made in which Canada decided that it wanted to have free trade talks with Israel, and therefore it would allow the resumption of military trade. So we have a political choice here, which is unfortunate. But what this tells us is that there's a recent history, a recent precedent in history of Canada actually suspending military trade with Israel as a response to human rights concerns. This means that if Canada did this before, we can do it again. But what exactly are the items that are being exported? Now, unfortunately, there's very limited information about this. The Canadian government doesn't require a lot of details to be reported publicly, so they don't give us a lot to work with. What the Canadian government doesn't tell us is exactly what weapons are being exported. Canada doesn't tell us who's producing or selling those weapons. Canada doesn't tell us who's buying those weapons, and Canada doesn't tell us how those weapons will be used. That doesn't give us a lot to go on. And the reason for this is that Canada just simply doesn't require companies to report this. And you might find out, for example, we can, through other means, find some examples, like if a company puts out a press release and boasts about getting a contract with an Israeli company to export weapons, we can find out that way. But unless people are being very upfront and transparent about this, there's no way for us to know the specifics. What we do know, however, what the government of Canada does provide is reporting of main categories of weapons that are exported. So again, this is very limited detail, but what it does tell us is that the most popular weapons that are being exported are in these three categories. One is in a category of items that could include bombs, torpedoes, rockets, missiles, other explosive devices, and related components. Another popular category is related to military aircraft and related components. Another bucket would be military spacecraft and or related components, possibly related to the space program. So you can get a sense, certainly, even though we don't know much at all, one can imagine that Canadian goods could be involved in things like airstrikes, either through the aircraft, through missiles, or in other ways. We don't have the specifics, but there's a very high risk that Canadian components are being used in that way. And then if we look at the United States, this is actually a much bigger problem of a black hole of information. Canada has put in place huge loopholes regarding the arms trade with the US in terms of what is reported and what is monitored. Weapons that are exported to the United States are basically off the book. If they're transported first to the United States and then transferred to Israel afterwards, then all of that trade is unregulated and unreported. So that means that it doesn't come up in the numbers that we look at when we talk about Canada-Israel trade. And it also means that Canada doesn't have to provide a human rights assessment regarding those exports. So this is a pretty major problem. And to give an example of that, we can look at the F-35 fighter jet. So Canada is a participant in the production of this jet. It produces a number of different components that are part of the plane, things like related to landing gear, pieces of the wing, that sort of thing, that make it onto basically every F-35, including those that are used by Israel. So we know that Canadian components are right now being used in planes that are involved in the indiscriminate bombing of Gaza. Now, none of those numbers show up in terms of the numbers of Canada-Israel military trade, because all of these components are first sent to the US, to Texas, to a factory where they're put onto planes and then sent to Israel, bypassing our arms export regime basically completely. So this is a pretty clear way that well, what it shows us basically is that the problem of Canada-Israel arms trade is actually much worse than it initially looks like, just based on the numbers that the government of Canada gives us. It's also important to step back and to realize that there's no safe level of risk associated with arming Israel, which is an occupying power. Remember that one of the criteria that Canada has to apply in terms of approving exports is risk to human rights. There is no safe level of risk. Even in a time of so-called peace, when there's not an active bombardment, Israel is maintaining a military occupation over the Palestinian territories, and this involves the use of violence, things like military checkpoints, military invasions, settler violence. All these things were skyrocketing before October 7th of last year, before the start of the war. In this kind of a context, there's just no way that Canadian weapons being transferred into that context could be considered safe. It's also, I think, particularly troubling when you consider the well-documented pattern of Israel committing war crimes and the possible the possibility that there will be a ruling of genocide at the International Court of Justice. Obviously, this is a context of extraordinary risk, and it just makes absolutely no sense for Canada to be sending any weapons there whatsoever. I do want to touch very briefly on just other military ties in addition to arms exports. That's really what we focused on. But Canada also imports Israeli weapons, over 130 million in a 4-year period. Canada also procures Israeli weapons, occasionally from Israeli weapons companies. Transport Canada a few years ago entered into a contract for a surveillance drone from one of the largest Israeli weapons companies, and other forms of military and security cooperation, intelligence sharing, working groups, joint training. We do touch on all of these points in our position paper, which, as Alex mentioned, is online, and we'll make sure to provide links to that. I focused on arms, but these are also points we're trying to get not just an arms embargo, but to really leverage all aspects of military cooperation with Israel and to sever them as a way to put pressure on Israel to end the war, to respect human rights and the occupation. So that's, I think, the end of my presentation. So I'm going to pass it back to Alex and let him talk a little bit about advocacy and how to talk to your MP about these.
Thanks, Michael. Just give me a second to get everything loaded up on my end. Can you confirm that it looks right and people are getting the right view? Michael, you're on mute, so I can't confirm.
Yep, that's right.
Okay, perfect. All right, everyone. Sorry for that brief delay while we worked out the electronics here. So what I'm going to cover in my section is two parts. I'm going to cover a bit of the policy landscape around arms sales to Israel. When talking to an MP, you don't need to remember all the details. You just need to remember the principles involved, and always remember that the details are in the position paper and the report that we'll send you. We're just trying to give you the background to feel confident in talking to an MP. So why an arms embargo? So Michael did a really good job of detailing some of the issues around the F-35. So this is an example of why an arms embargo. It's not the whole reason, but the F-35 would not fly without Canadian components. The majority of these components being sent to the US and then assembled makes it a bit of a loophole, but we do have the power to decide that we're not going to send Israel replacement parts and we're not going to disperse parts to the US. We could bleed Israel dry if we refuse to export them. So you'll notice if you read Israeli press and American press that the Israelis are actually more worried about the US cutting off direct military transfers of arms than they are about the US calling for a ceasefire. Because it's ultimately the material support that really empowers their war effort. So Canada has a unique strategic position in the world to be able to affect both the US and Israel. Israel's air squadron of F-35s and other aircraft would not fly without Canada's support traffic through the US. We're a choke point in the US's military industrial complex. So it's a unique opportunity to affect it and its support for Israel. So the Export and Import Permits Act. This is the federal legislation that mandates the government investigate and mitigate risk to human rights from our arms trade. So this act originates like in the 1980s, but it was updated in 2019 by the current government. We harmonized it with our signing of a more recent international treaty. It was called the Arms Trade Treaty. The Arms Trade Treaty is what gives us international obligations to ensure that our arms trade respects human rights. And then we redeveloped this legislation to be in parallel with that. So we're not supposed to deal arms in cases where there are risks of serious violations of international law. And unique to Canada is we actually added our own feminist foreign policy obligations when we developed this legislation. So the point V there at the very bottom, where we say we will not issue permits where there's a risk of serious acts of gender-based violence or serious acts of violence against women and children. That's a uniquely Canadian obligation. Now, just think that 70% of the deaths in Gaza right now are of women and children. And Canada is uniquely breaking its arms trade obligations. So that act basically puts this decision in the hands of the Minister of Foreign Affairs. She could decide tonight to impose an embargo, and with a couple strokes of a pen, really, she could impose that embargo at her discretion. She could suspend, cancel, and reject all permits for human rights reasons. She actually has a legal obligation to do that if there's a significant risk of violation of international law or violence against women and children, as we saw. She's just not doing it. She very easily could decide to add Israel to a list of countries where selling Canadian arms is banned. So we want to put pressure on the minister and other MPs to put pressure on the minister so that she exercises the power that she has. So now let's get into actually talking to your MP about this issue. My goal tonight is to give you some principles to be confident in talking with your MP. I'll give you a bit of a formula, but as I try and get at through the rest of the presentation, developing your own way of speaking that comes from the heart is what's going to be the most effective communication with your MP, and that takes practice. I've been campaigning for social and environmental justice for over 20 years. I've lobbied at the municipal, provincial, and federal level. Before CJPME, I worked on like 2 campaigns that were pretty successful. So I worked on the Energy East Pipeline campaign, and by that I mean opposing the Energy East Pipeline from a climate justice perspective. And I worked with the One campaign, getting money for international development. When I first started out as a young activist, I kind of thought the way that was only going to be effective to influence an MP was to run in their office and basically like scream at them to do the right thing. I took a very oppositional approach, and I think that's actually really crucial work still. But when you're encountering an undecided or a soft MP, it's not necessarily the right posture. I spent more time occupying MP offices than engaged in dialogue. This needed to be done with hard opponents, but it wasn't good for changing a potential supportive MP's mind. It can cause polarization at the wrong time in a campaign. As I gained experience, I thought my job was to tell them all the facts that they didn't know. Over time, I learned that most MPs are not primarily motivated by facts. They're motivated by winning elections, and they're motivated by the values that provide a lens in how they interpret facts. And they might not value the same things that I do, so the way that they're going to organize the facts that I share with them is going to be different than mine. I can actually remember going to this meeting with the Minister of Environment of Manitoba, and I spent 30 minutes in that meeting telling him and his staff how his climate plan was inadequate based upon climate science. Needless to say, it didn't go well, and he never invited me back. As I've gained more skill and experience, I've learned that the focus should be on relationships, power, and moral persuasion. My job as someone going in to talk to an MP is to identify the values we might share and figure out a strategic way to appeal to them. And if that doesn't work, then it's time to go back and organize. Maybe I end up occupying their offices just like my younger self, but before I do, I make sure that I attempt dialogue from a strategic perspective. So, step number 1, find your MP. The easiest way to do that I have found is to go to the House of Commons website, click on members, and then type in my postal code. So you can do that at any time. There's both an English and a French side, so choose your language of preference. Once you identify the contact details of your MP, for most folks here, it will be the constituency office rather than the Parliament Hill office because you are a constituent. So ask for a meeting by the email provided, but always follow up with a phone call to show you're serious about wanting to meet. You need to keep calling them regularly, but respectfully until you get a meeting. The thing to understand is that at the height of this in October and November, MPs were getting like 10,000 emails a day. So it's really hard to distinguish a request to meet from an email on the issue in general, or who seriously wants to meet and is going to follow up versus someone who's not going to follow up their email. So that picking up the phone and respectfully asking for a meeting and continuing to do it every couple of days or week after week is the thing that's going to get you in the door, especially in crisis moments like we're facing. Some other principles to keep in mind is that as much as it can not seem like it sometimes, MPs are just regular folks who became an elected official for a reason. Try to understand them and their motivation. You need to understand your MP to be able to appeal to their shared values. So do research on like causes they volunteered for, statements that they've made in the past, and kind of profile them a bit to understand them. You'll also just get to understand them by having conversations over time. As I kind of alluded to before, MPs do not need to know all the facts to be persuaded. You don't need to be an expert to talk to them. You need to be able to share your values and your morals and find where your morals and values intersect with your MP. They need to know why you care about something, and it's most powerful if you can show how the sentiments that you're expressing reflect a broader view of their voter base. Because ultimately, MPs care about re-election. It can be normal for an MP to come across as non-committal. This is especially true of MPs who are in a centrist political party like the current Liberal government. The last thing to remember there is that MP staff are their gatekeepers, so be respectful to them if you want to gain access to a face-to-face or by phone conversation with your MP. Their job is to screen out difficult people or people that their MP just wouldn't jive with. MPs are available in Ottawa at their constituency offices or by an internet program like Zoom, like we're on tonight. MPs and their staff absolutely value personalized communication over templates or form emails. The more you can personalize your communication, the better. And always remember to say, I don't know, when it's the truth. No BS is a good policy. So a little bit more about effective communication with an MP. We're going in there to have a dialogue because the best lobbying of an MP who's undecided or soft is it's going to be a conversation. You want to get them talking about their perspective, but you also want to always steer the conversation back to the reason that you're there. Ensure you are conveying your personal reasons for bringing this issue to their attention. Actually share your emotions, not just the facts. Help them understand why you are motivated to act. While we are asking you to bring your passion for the issue, we're also asking you to remain respectful with your MP and their staff. It's okay to criticize policy and positions of elected officials, but it's pretty ineffective with an undecided MP to criticize them for being a fence sitter or to criticize their past positions on a personal level. It's very rare that you'll only need to speak to an MP once to shift their position. It's going to be an ongoing conversation that you're cultivating over time. And ensure when you do speak on an issue that it's concise and direct as possible. Keep your comments to the issue at hand. A general rule of thumb is you should be able to summarize the issue in about 5 minutes to leave room for lots of back and forth. So, I've talked a lot about communicating your values and finding shared values with an MP that you frame the facts with. So it is very important to communicate the basic facts, but just as important to ensure that you give the MP a morals or value frame at which to interpret those facts. So pretty effective with all parties is an appeal to democratic values. Oftentimes, lots of political debates, it's often a fight over what best fits our democratic values. So in the case of the arms trade, Michael did a really good job of outlining that Canada is not transparent in the way it approaches the arms trade. So we need to appeal to the democratic value of public transparency and scrutiny. Canadians deserve to know who we sell weapons to and if those weapons are used to limit human rights. We have a right to know what we sell, how much, and to whom, and most importantly, how it is used. We believe that Parliament should regularly scrutinize our arms trade. That can be boiled down into a simple sentence like, democracy doesn't work when government hides information from citizens. Saying something like that appeals to the values and kind of the ideas behind it. So, with the centrist and the progressive parties especially, an appeal to the international rules-based order can sometimes mobilize the right values with MPs. The Liberals in particular have built their brand around a rules-based international order. Sometimes it feels like you can hear it ad nauseum from the foreign minister of Canada, especially when it was Chrystia Freeland. they're really vulnerable to being shown to have double standards. Reminding them that the international rules are for everyone, whether it's friend or foe, is important. I think we've seen the difference in the way that Canada speaks about Russia versus the way it speaks about Israel, but in a nutshell, they are both illegal occupying powers in a war for land annexation. But the way we approach them are very different. So last, when dealing with the government, especially because of the way they updated the Export and Imports Permits Acts, we can appeal to their brand. And that was the feminism right from the beginning. The feminist foreign policy has been something key to this government's brand. We have a standing domestic policy to ensure our weapons are not being used in serious violence against women and children. We can appeal to them that a feminist foreign policy doesn't support a campaign of mass femicide in Gaza. We can demonstrate to them that they're ignoring the values that they promised us and that we expect of them through supporting Israel's bombardment. So the most important part of any meeting is having a precise and personalized ask for your MP. Whenever you meet with them, make sure as much as possible it's something you can hold them accountable to and verify. Prioritize what your ask is based upon the potential impact on the issue and the particular roles that that MP has in Parliament, which you can find on the House of Commons website link that I showed you right at the start. It will list what their roles are in government right there on the website. So an example of a concrete ask for a backbench MP. The backbench MP is someone who doesn't have very many parliamentary roles. They're just an MP, is to write a letter to the foreign affairs minister calling for her to implement an arms embargo on Israel and post that letter on your Twitter. So the clear ask is that they're taking a position for an arms embargo. They're communicating that to the decision maker who can actually implement it, and they're posting it on Twitter so you and all their other constituents can see that they actually did it. So there, it's a personal ask, it's precise, and is verifiable because they shared it in public. That concludes the presentation portion. This is the list of the resources that we will share after the webinar. So we'll share the position paper once again. We'll share the report that we put out in 2022. We also have a email call to action that's directed at Minister of Foreign Affairs Jolie to implement an arms embargo. And we have a parliamentary official e-petition that is sponsored by the NDP Foreign Affairs critic Heather McPherson that is up on the parliamentary website, but you can get there through our website as well. So I'm going to bring Michael back and we can do the Q&A. We will stop the Q&A at 8 o'clock and kind of see where we're at and let people who need to go at that time. And then we can give it up to another 15 minutes after 8 o'clock. And just remember in the Q&A to upvote questions that you like so we know that they are questions that lots of people are interested in. We aren't going to be doing voice questions. So if you could type in the Q&A, that would be the ideal way to have your question asked.
Alex, since you were talking, I know you haven't had a chance to look at the questions. One interesting one just to start off with maybe is from Amy. She says, my MP says she is speaking up for Palestine and is one of the only MPs doing so, but refuses to publicly do or share her work, that I have to trust her that she's doing this. How can I effectively counter this?
So I had a MP actually say the exact same thing to me. So what I did was I asked her to write to the Prime Minister, and I dropped the publicly verifiable part, and I asked her to just share it with me and promised that I would not share it publicly. So I'm not going to tell you who the MP is because I'd be breaking the confidentiality that that action was on. But I can absolutely assure you that some MPs who want to keep it quiet will express their values to the leaders in their party, but they don't want to be a lightning rod. So if all else fails, every ask that you have, they're not willing to verify it in public, ask them to privately verify it with you. I'm just going to take a look at the question, so forgive the silence.
There's a few questions that that are about just different actions, clarity around arms embargo and some of the specifics. We didn't get too into the nuts and bolts about the very specific actions. We do outline these in the position paper, and these documents are intended to be useful for you to go into a meeting. It provides not only specific recommendations, but provides some additional context and supporting arguments and sources to help you effectively make those demands to MPs. So some of it is around asking the minister not to approve and to reject export permits to Israel, but it's also about putting in place procurement policies to make sure we're not purchasing Israeli weapons. It's about ending loopholes that surround exports through the US. It's around expelling the Israeli Defense Attaché Office in Canada. There are a whole bunch of things that we outline in some detail. So I do suggest that you check that out and look at it. And hopefully it's useful as a resource. And if not, or if you come into any problems, let us know, and we can always adapt these and improve if something else is needed.
I'm going to answer a couple of questions that I see here live. I've got one from Raul. Is it helpful to go to an MP meeting by yourself, with your family, with neighbors? Is it better to just meet with them in small groups in order to build a relationship first, or go with more numbers? That's a depends question. There's no hard and fast rule. It depends on the people you might be going with. It depends on the MP. I would say the first time that I meet with an MP, I would go alone, and I would try and just get to know who they are, where they stand on the issue. MPs are going to be slightly more transparent with just you in the room. I think there's an element of just being human that the more people there are, the more you feel like you need to perform. So it's always good to, especially at the start of a relationship, not put an MP in more performance mode than what comes out from a one-on-one conversation. Now, if you're not making a lot of progress with that MP, as I said, one of the things that you really need to do is demonstrate that the sentiments that you're sharing are reflected in the broader community. So after a meeting or two, if you're not getting anywhere and shifting your MP's position, then it's absolutely appropriate to start trying to bring more people to the meeting. Most MPs aren't necessarily going to easily agree to a meeting beyond like a couple people. Then it kind of becomes something else. But if you have like a neighborhood association or any type of group with a name, then you can invite them to have a conversation with that whole group. Those types of conversations obviously become more unwieldy as more people want to be able to express themselves. So the larger your group, the less ability to have a dialogue there that exists. So it's always just like a balancing act of you're cultivating a relationship, you're trying to show community support, but you're also trying to ensure that everyone gets to speak. So there's never a perfect answer. You just have to think through what works at the moment. And we're definitely here and available to help you strategize for meetings like that. I'll also take the other question about the ministers not obeying the law. Can she be sued for that? The Canadian government can be sued, and in a certain respect, the minister would be held responsible. I think all of our laws are open to judicial review. It requires finding a legal team that has the resourcing to be able to do that, and potentially a proponent who has the resourcing being able to do that. It's very unlikely that it's going to happen pro bono. The case becomes a lot more open and shut if the ICJ provides provisional measures that are positive in South Africa's genocide case. Brought there, but they are going to give kind of interim orders to states on how they need to approach the conflict while they wait for the full trial, if they deem that a full trial is warranted. The provisional measures could be in South Africa's favor, they could be in between, or they could be in Israel's favor. We don't know, but there is a strong likelihood that the court may tell third-party states, such as Canada, that they should stop arming Israel's assault on Gaza.
I might address the one question here about Green and NDPs that support an embargo, or how do we deal with Green and NDP MPs? What is effective in leveraging more pressure? I do think that in general, what the NDP and Greens have been doing the past few months has been pretty positive in terms of statements they've put out, but also in terms of questioning the government during Parliament. I think they've been pretty effective at getting at some of these issues, but obviously we need to do much more. I think sometimes too, if there's, for example, a foreign affairs critic in a party and they have some decent statements, then other MPs might be less likely to speak out. They might say, well, our party's already speaking out on this, see our critic, and therefore I don't need to say anything. So I think coming and Alex had his thoughts, but I think coming at it from the perspective of, well, you're my elected representative, I'm your constituent, I want you to stand up for this. Will you echo, maybe if the party has good positions, will you as an MP echo those? Will you put out a statement? I think there's always there's room for individual action. I don't think we should let parties get away with putting all of of an issue, all of the responsibility for an issue onto one or two people. I think all MPs have a responsibility to speak out. And so I think, yeah, I do think it's important to continue to push MPs even when their party has decent positions. I don't know if Alex, you want to add to that?
Mm-hmm. So I think the NDP set a precedent for what we can expect of them on a foreign policy issue when it's important. They signed, the entire NDP caucus signed a letter saying they all support a ceasefire. They all put their names to that. They said that when an issue is important for foreign policy, that we should expect the whole caucus to speak in one voice, not just the critic. So we can hold them accountable to that precedent. The other thing is that we need to communicate with NDP MPs that they should maintain the position that they currently have. So the party, I do believe, on the books has support for an arms embargo with Israel. we don't want them to cave to kind of pro-Israeli pressure. So we need to keep up the pressure on the NDP to maintain that position. So you can just say, like, we want you to keep this position. We like this position. Do not cave to the pro-Israel lobby. And then push that particular MP that you're talking to support the party's position publicly, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's on their website. As I said, some verifiable public statement. You can ask them to make a member statement in the House. You can ask them to ask the Prime Minister a question. It doesn't always have to be the critic that asks questions on these topics or makes statements. Any MP can decide that this is where they want to spend their time if we push them. The other thing is we want the NDP to lead in subpoenaing the arms permits to the Foreign Affairs Committee. This is a bit technical, so don't feel like you need to remember this, but we just want to share some of the strategy that we're up to. So Michael really pointed out a key problem with Canada's export of arms. It's that the government doesn't share any of the data, any of the contracts. So that's why I really suggested we need to push the government and we need to push all MPs on the democratic value of transparency and public scrutiny. So the thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be pushing the Foreign Affairs Committee to subpoena the arms export permits. They did this in 2021 for arms permits to Turkey because we found out, not like us in particular, it was other groups, but we found out that Turkey was diverting arms components to Azerbaijan in their war in Nagorno-Karabakh. So Canada studied that and decided they're suspending arms exports to Turkey. There's a precedent for this, and we want them to follow that precedent for the Israel case. So we want them at the Foreign Affairs Committee to subpoena the permits. We want to study, and we want to ensure that Canadian arms are not being used in human rights violations. They almost certainly are, given the context in Gaza right now. So that we want the government to follow through on the precedent that has already happened when we had a temporary arms embargo with Turkey because of that investigation. And so we want Heather McPherson to lead that, and to lead that effort, she is going to need the support of her caucus. So that's what we can push NDP MPs to do, because it makes material the supportive statements.
There's a few questions about what if my MP is conservative and where do the conservatives stand? And I think I wonder if you have any thoughts on that. Just as a note, the conservatives, their position on this issue is bad. They fully support Israel and they do not support a ceasefire or any other measures. But as someone in the Q&A did point out correctly, they have been very quiet about this. They have not really been going out of their way to make a lot of noise in support of Israel, which seems like a departure from the past. And maybe they don't see it necessarily as a winning political issue as much as they used to. I'm not really sure what to make of it, but that doesn't mean that if you have a meeting with your conservative MP, that they're going to be open or receptive to talking about this. So Alex, if you're if that's your MP, is it even worth meeting with them?
Definitely. The Conservatives need to hear that this is important to people, including their constituents. Their position might change if they hear from enough constituents that support this issue. They might be like, oh crap, we're off. We're not going to win the election if we don't change this. There's kind of an algorithm that happens. It's like in an MP's office, they like value a written letter a certain amount. They value a personal phone call amount, and then they value a form letter different. So one way that we can stack the algorithm is to take the most personalized and direct action. That's meetings, phone calls, personalized letters. We can make, even in a riding where you're almost assured that the Conservatives will win due to historic political culture, you can still mess with their algorithm if you and other constituents take those kind of high bar actions of writing a personalized letter or phoning them or asking to meet. But the other thing I would say is that the Conservatives have a recent track record of pushing the government on the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. They've actually brought it up in Parliament a significant number of times just before this kind of assault on Gaza. So we have a standard to hold them to. Israel is number 2 customer for arms is Azerbaijan, the offending party in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. They're the reason that Canada suspended arms exports to Turkey, because Turkish arms were ending up in Azerbaijan. So just following the logic there, you can say, well, you supported taking action to stop the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict because of, like Canadian arms ending up in Azerbaijani hands. Well, Israel's their second, Azerbaijan is Israel's second biggest customer. How do we know that Canadian arms aren't ending up in Nagorno-Karabakh vis-a-vis Israeli arms companies? So you can hold them to that and start holding them accountable to not being hypocrites or having a double standard. It's when you kind of hold them to their most recent previous actions and consistency with those that we have the strongest possibility of shifting Conservatives. A second thing is a lot of Conservative campaigns are about public transparency and ethics. One of their favorite things to go after the current government on is transparency and ethics. So that's why I said appeal to the public's right to know and appeal to parliamentary scrutiny of the arms trade. Those democratic values are something that cross-cut all parties. As much as you might get frustrated by Conservatives sometimes, we do actually still share those values. They're across the political culture. It just doesn't feel like it when some of their policy positions are so frustrating for other reasons. Just looking at more questions here in the list. Okay, I think the cabinet minister one is important. So even if your MP is also a cabinet minister, you can still ask them to write to the prime minister and verify it. Their job is to express their views to cabinet. They're in listening mode when they're in party caucus a lot of the time, but it's their job to tell the prime minister what they think. It's their job to sit around the cabinet table and tell Melanie Joly whether her policy approach to Israel and Palestine is working, whether it's ethical. It's their job to identify legal risks. So don't let them say that they can't hold other cabinet ministers accountable at cabinet. It's going to be hard to verify because Canadian laws do allow cabinet secrecy, but don't be shy to say you have a moral obligation to represent your constituents and you have a moral obligation to ensure that the Canadian government follows its own laws, and that moral and legal obligation extends throughout your role as a cabinet minister and at the cabinet table. Cabinet solidarity isn't actually a law. It's a principle of governance that has been taken to be custom. The Canada's obligations under the Arms Trade Treaty and our domestic legislation should supersede that parliamentary custom. but cabinet ministers hide behind it. But it's our job as people who are concerned on this issue to not let them hide behind it. Any other questions you want to address, Michael?
I might say something about this one about sort of Israel has a right to defend itself. I think yeah, a lot of people who email their MP are going to get really unacceptable generic responses like this that say, Israel has a right to defend itself, and therefore use that to take no action whatsoever. Obviously, the standard when we're talking about arms exports is domestic law and international law, which has nothing to do with the rights that Israel has or doesn't have. It's about is there a substantial risk that these exports will contribute to violations of human rights, of violence against women and girls, of war crimes. Those are the standards that Canadian policy is held against, not whether or not a country, including Israel, is justified overall in a war. And on this point, too, it's important to note that Israel, under international law, does not, strictly speaking, have a right to defend itself, as according to international law, according to the International Court of Justice, Israel doesn't have a right to defend itself against threats emanating from within territory it controls, and that includes the occupied Palestinian territories. In other words, you can't wage war against a people who you are occupying. So instead, the laws of occupation apply, which are much more stricter in terms of regulating how Israel is allowed to act, because one of the most important responsibilities of an occupying power is to protect the rights of and the well-being of the occupied population. So it's all a bit technical, but the language around a right to defend itself isn't strictly true. And regardless, it's beside the question. Whether or not you think Israel is justified, it doesn't mean that its actions supersede international law, and it doesn't mean that that can supersede Canada's own legal obligations. So I think again, always bringing it back to Canada's own legal obligations, its own supposed human rights standard, and how that is clearly not being taken into account here. I think that's probably the most important way to respond to that. Does that make sense, Alex?
Yeah, I would just also like to emphasize that whether Canada likes it or not, whether Israel likes it or not, or whether the US likes it or not, Palestinians have a right to self-determination. And in the context of an extended occupation like this, they have a right to resist the occupation and self-determine their political futures. That includes armed struggle, according to international law. So where they don't have a right in this resistance is to target civilians. But if they are conducting an armed struggle against Israeli military targets, that is within their rights. And the International Court of Justice has ruled that Israel does not get to claim a right of military self-defense, as Michael outlined, according to the UN Charter. That is because Palestinians' right to self-determination is considered stronger in international law than Israel's right to self-defense. The other part is that it doesn't, the kind of nuance there that Michael was bringing up is it's because Palestine isn't a state. Israel's refused to recognize Palestine as a state. That's like Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, has kind of staked his career on Palestine never getting a state. But the thing is Israel would actually have a right to defend itself if it allowed a Palestinian state to take place. Then it would be one state attacking another, and Article 51 of the UN Charter would apply. But in the absence of a Palestinian state, due to Israel's aggression, they don't have that right to self-defense. I don't know if I've confused the issue more, but there's key principles at play there that the Palestinians have the right to a viable state, and Canada should support that. Palestinians have a right to self-determination that trumps Israel's right to self-defense, and Canada should recognize that that is what international law says. I'm going to answer another MP related question. Sorry, whenever someone types a question, it goes all the way to the bottom, and this question's at the top. So what is a realistic approach to take if my MP, due to the meeting request topic, refuses to meet with me? So that's actually just straight up where I think the young version of Alex that I criticized, his strategy is a little bit more correct. That is where you need to exercise your democratic right to protest that MP for being unwilling to engage in democratic dialogue with their constituents. You don't have to do that, but that is where I think that that tactic is useful. And you'd be willing to stop protesting them if they earnestly engage in dialogue with you and other constituents who are passionate about that issue. That's just where I think those type of kind of like outside pressure tactics are the most effective. Forcing that MP to recognize that you're not going away, that you're collecting more friends and more neighbors and more citizens in the area who are passionate about that issue as well, and you're not going to let them dodge it by refusing to meet. Any other questions that are jumping out to you, Michael? Before you maybe actually answer, I need to hold myself accountable. I'm 9 minutes late in saying to everyone that we've passed the 8 o'clock mark and that our social contract has ended. You do not need to stay if you need to get somewhere else. We will just maybe answer questions for another 5 to 10 minutes, and then that will conclude the webinar. So please feel free to leave now, but we will stay on for a couple more minutes to answer some of the more burning questions. I'm going to answer this one here by FVP. Subject line, yes. Not only tell them the subject, but actually note that it is a request to meet on that subject. So I usually put request to meet on the arms trade in Gaza in my emails to MPs or to cabinet ministers. It's very important to also specify that you're not only willing to meet with the MP or the cabinet minister, but you're willing to also meet with staff. When I was young in this job, I made the mistake of just asking for the elected official, and then they say, nope, he's not available. And I have to send another email and be like, oh, but what about the staff? And that would delay it by 3 weeks, but you'd eventually get the staff. So if you just ask to speak with the elected official, and if they're not available, could they please delegate this meeting to a staff member? And that will eliminate a significant back and forth. But it's always good to articulate in the subject line what the topic of the meeting is. But I would say in the email to not share all your talking points beforehand, because then it's just kind of repetitive with the meeting, and the MP can decide, the next time this person's just going to share all I need to know in the email. So I always don't share resources until after the meeting. And I don't share all of the things that I'm going to say in the email. I just have a short and snappy email saying when I'm available, what the topic is, asking them to delegate it to staff if they're not available. And if it's a cabinet minister, I try and tell them how it's directly relevant to their portfolio if possible.
There's one question here about whether, we're talking about members of parliament specifically at a federal level, but is there any value talking to city councilors and members of provincial legislatures, even though, they don't have jurisdiction over foreign policy and arms trade? I've been seeing people asking their municipalities asking for ceasefire resolutions. Well, I think that the organizing that has been done at the local level around the ceasefire shows that it is very valuable. In the weeks leading up to Canada taking a sort of a position more or less in support of a ceasefire at the UN, there were a number of city councils that ended up passing motions, symbolic motions in support of a ceasefire. And I think that was really powerful. In the absence of any action from the federal government, seeing at the local level people raise their voices definitely has an impact from the bottom down, from the bottom up, really building political pressure at different levels. Even though strictly speaking they don't have control over foreign policy, they still have a voice. They can still make those kinds of symbolic statements, and they can take other kinds of actions. A city council might be able to, for example, put in process a procedure to not procure goods or services from a company complicit in Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories, for example. There are things that local levels can do, and overall it's about building public support across civil society and political society, because that, as a groundswell, puts pressure on the higher levels to take action. So I definitely think it's worthwhile.
I'm going to answer another question here. The question is, when I call NDP leader Jagmeet Singh's office, his team is very supportive of the asks, and they have taken public positions to that effect too. But they don't seem to take any meaningful action to push for a ceasefire, for example. How can he use his power to have a red line with Trudeau? How to push them to actually use their power to the fullest political power to back up their words? So in a nutshell, you're asking, like, why is the MP not calling for a ceasefire in Gaza or an arms embargo a necessary foundation of its confidence and supply agreement with the government? The simple answer to that is it's actually on us as people who support the Palestinian cause to demonstrate to both the NDP and the Liberals that this will be an election issue. I think one of the reasons you've seen the government navigate this like it has, and you've seen the NDP navigate this like it has, is because traditionally speaking, support for Palestine has not been one of the top issues to influence Canadians at the ballot box as a whole. And our job as organizers and advocates on this issue is to try and convince other Canadians to take this issue into consideration when they're thinking about their vote. If we could do that, and we could demonstrate to the NDP that it could pick off enough supporters from other parties on this issue, then it might be willing to hold the Trudeau government. But unless we're able to just demonstrate this as an election issue, then the NDP is not going to be willing to tank this current government over that. But our hope is that we can demonstrate that this is becoming a more important issue to Canadians that will be considered at the ballot box, because it gets to the heart of whether we can believe the sincerity of this current government on the ideals that they've continued to profess, to me, more and more cynically over time since their original election. So it's up to us, again, as activists, to demonstrate that this issue is going to last till the next election, and it's going to be considered. So that's one of the things we can put in our communications if it's authentic. I don't think we should lie. I don't think we should create a paper tiger for ourselves. But if this is going to be something that you consider when going to vote, tell your MP that. Put it in the emails you're sending. Say it in the phone calls. They need to know that you will consider this in your calculus when you decide who you're voting for.
If I could just say one thing about the petition, because it's come up a few times. We mentioned that there's a parliamentary petition that we put forward, and it's been sponsored by NDP Foreign Affairs critic Heather McPherson. petitions have, not the most impact overall, but they can be a very useful tool for drawing attention to an issue and creating conversation around an issue. With these parliamentary petitions, there's a formal process. If they get enough signatures, then the government has to formally respond in writing after a certain period of time. It also means that will be introduced into parliament. So the MP who sponsored it will speak about it in parliament. So it definitely raises awareness. And it also is something that we can organize. We can ask people to do. We can use that as a tool to talk to people. Almost 50,000 people have already signed it, which is pretty significant. And we have another month before the petition closes, so we can get much more than that. People are probably pretty aware of the petition recently sponsored by Alexander Boularice in support of a ceasefire. That got, a 250,000 signatures on it. It was the most, at that time, the most, I guess, successful petition in Parliament's history. That got news coverage. It's definitely something that can help. It's just one form of demonstrating political pressure and widespread public support for this specific demand. And so I definitely encourage people to sign that and to share it, ask people to sign it. And we will keep people posted on how the government responds. Often we're disappointed, unfortunately, when the government does respond to a petition, but it also often it's so hard to get them to say anything about a topic. This is one of the only ways you can actually compel them to say something. So yeah, definitely has a few different uses.
I'll take another one, and I think after that, Michael, I'll let you choose one more question, and I think we'll call it at that point. So this question is, Israel is a terrorist entity. It should be subjected to broad-based sanctions, not just military sanctions. Look at how quick the West was to sanction Russia. Why the position to only focus on weapons? Is this a strategic thing? As I tried to identify on the slide about why an arms embargo, it was because we're currently in a moment of a particular genocidal campaign where Israel is using this military technology right now to, slaughter Palestinian civilians. So the focus on the arms trade in particular is because it is a military moment. This moment is defined by Israel's use of military aggression. I think the CJPME has, general policy priorities to work on boycotting settlement products. We're supporters of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign overall. But we think that this moment, because of the genocidal campaign, deserves to make dealing with Canada's arms trade with Israel a strategic priority in hopes to have some material effect on Israel's war effort and to highlight the gross human rights violations being conducted by Israel's military. It really is just like it's a focus that resonates with the current moment with other folks in the public. Yet we do obviously agree that Israel deserves to be treated by Canada with broad-based economic sanctions until Palestinian self-determination is realized. So, like, you're right on principle, and yes, we are making this call for kind of strategic campaigning reasons.
Well, Alex, I'm not sure I have anything more to add. Maybe we should wrap it up unless you have any final ones.
I just want to thank everyone for attending tonight. It was really great to see, like over 350 people show up for this webinar. And you can email us if you still have follow-up questions. We will send an email with the follow-up resources. I don't think it's going to be tonight. I think Michael,
It'll
once
be
the email
tomorrow.
come out. Yeah, so the email will come out tomorrow, and don't be shy if you have lingering questions to the email. I can't commit to answering 350 emails if everyone sends a question, but I try and do my best if there are um, questions where I can steer people in the right direction. And it's also really good to give us feedback by sending in those questions on topics we should cover in future webinars. I am hearing from the 2 webinars that I've done since I started with the CJPME that there is appetite for talking to conservatives about Palestinian human rights webinar, and it will be on my mind to address that. I've heard the clear feedback from all of you who are coming out and asking those questions. So with that, once again, I thank you for being here, and look forward to campaigning with you on this issue, though, uphold Palestinian human rights and end this war. Good
Thanks,
night.
everyone.